All right, so for this next video, we're going to be delineating a watershed for Warriors Mark Run. So we're just starting with the filled digital elevation model for the Spring Creek and the Spruce Creek watersheds, as well as the NHD flow lines. So if you've got those pulled up, then you're all ready to go. If not, go ahead and pause the video, take a moment, find those layers, and then you can unpause it and follow along again. So if you are not exactly familiar with the watershed so very well, you might not know where Warriors Mark Run is. It's actually the next stream tributary watershed over from the Half Moon Creek watershed that we've been working in as part of our projects. So I don't know if you can recognize where we've been working for our project, but this is the Half Moon Creek watershed, and Warriors Mark Run is right over here. So that's part of the Spruce Creek watershed, and we're in the State College area over in the Spring Creek watershed. So we're going to go ahead and show you how to use the query builder to find Warriors Mark Run if you didn't know where it was and couldn't find it right away. The other thing you could do is use the identify tool. And if you think, well, I think it's either this one or this one, then you can kind of zoom in on those streams. And if you use the identify tool, then you'll be able to click on the little stream segments and figure out what's what. So let's see, streamlines are a little bit hard to see here, huh? But if we click here, there's Spruce Creek. And I said that Half Moon is a tributary to Spruce Creek as well as the Warriors Mark Run. So let's just make sure. All right, there's Half Moon Creek. And that means this one should be Warriors Mark Run. Okay, so that means we're going to be delineating this watershed using GIS today. But if for some reason you didn't know where that was, that's fine. We could go into where this says properties in the flow line layer. And let's see, we would be searching the query builder. So we'd go to definition query, query builder. And we want to find the name. So this name is going to be Warriors Mark Run. Make sure you spell everything correctly. And since it's a text string, we need to put these single quotation marks around the beginning and the end of the name. So once you have that query builder built, hit OK and apply and OK. And remember, what that's going to do is get rid of everything on the map that's not Warriors Mark Run. And you'll see we've got two different flow lines here. So we need to make sure we have the flow line layer on. That is the one we just did the query builder for. So you can kind of see, even though it's a little bit choppy because we need both of these streamline layers in order to see the full stream network, but this one's definitely Warriors Mark Run. So we know this is going to be the watershed that we're delineating for. So I'm going to go ahead and leave the streamlines off for now because we don't need them for the moment. So the first thing we need to do before we can delineate a watershed by hand is, or by specifying a point of interest on GIS. So we did the basin raster tool earlier in these videos, and that basically allowed us to create the watersheds for the entire digital elevation model that we were starting with. But here we want to say, okay, we have this specific point of interest that we want to delineate our watershed for. And so that's what I'm going to walk us through how to do now. So the first thing we need to do is go down to the hydrology tools. And we've already filled our DEM, but if for some reason you are starting with a new file that you hadn't filled yet, then you should first fill your digital elevation model. And then you would need to do flow direction, which we've also done in our previous video. So I can go ahead and add that layer. So I just need to navigate to where I saved that. And I was working in this practice folder, so I can find my flow direction.tif and add that. And it'll ask if I want to create pyramids. I'm going to say yes. Basically what that does is it creates, it basically allows you to view the DEM easily, or the raster file easily, no matter how zoomed in or zoomed out you are. If you don't create those, then it kind of has to create them as you are moving in and out of different resolutions here. And so the more zoomed in you are, zoomed out you are, it would have to kind of rebuild those pyramids. And so if you just do that from the beginning, then you're all set. Okay, so here's our flow direction raster. The next thing we need to do is make the flow accumulation raster. And so this is going to tell us, if you remember, the flow direction raster tells us the direction that water is moving across your landscape, and flow accumulation kind of keeps track of the number of pixels that are accumulating into each individual cell on your digital elevation model. So across your landscape, as the flow accumulation value increases, then you have more parts of the landscape that are accumulating to that particular cell. And so the more that flow is accumulating in a specific spot, the higher the probability is that that's a stream. And so the higher the number, then the more likely that is to be an actual stream, or a blue line on your topo maps. So that's what we're going to create here. And so we'll start with our flow direction raster. And then we'll create where we want to save this file. So this is going to be flow accumulation. So I'll just call it flow accum.tiff. Hit save. And that looks like it's all set. And we could hit OK. And that'll take a moment to crank through. So I'm going to go ahead and pause the recording while that takes a few minutes. And I think if it took as long as it took my students in class, it's about 5 to 7 minutes that this takes to create. And when it's first done, you basically have this black rectangle, which looks horrifying. So if you get a big black rectangle when you're done, then you know it worked correctly. All right, so I'll come back in just a moment. See you in a second. All right, so you can see that my flow accumulation layer created, and as I had mentioned before, it's basically just this horrific looking black rectangle, right? So if you got that, maybe with a little bit of light here down in the bottom, then you know your raster file worked correctly. So congratulations, you got your black rectangle. Okay, so how do we clean this up? Let's go ahead and change the symbology. So to do that, we actually need to go into the properties and go into the symbology tab. And we're going to be looking to go to the classified section over on the side here. And we're going to make 2 classes. So I'm going to select 2. And the reason we're going to do this is we're basically going to have a color that streams and a color that's not streams. So to do that, we're going to go into where it says classify, and we're going to set our break values. And I've gone ahead and played with this a bit, and I know that a value of 750 works pretty well for what we need to do today. So what that means is when 750 pixels have accumulated into one location, we've set that as the threshold for what we refer to as a stream. So I'm going to hit OK, and we'll leave the maximum number alone. So you can see something like 11 million pixels is the maximum number of accumulation counts that we have here. So I'll hit OK. And now we can specify the streams as white here. So you'll see anything greater than 750 will show as white, and anything less than 750, so things that we're saying haven't accumulated enough flow in that cell to be called a stream, will remain black. So I'll hit apply. And okay, and wow, look, now suddenly we can see our stream network. And if you remember, Warrior's Mark Run was right around in here. If I turn on that flow line layer that I was working with before, you can kind of start to see the flow lines match over where our flow accumulation layer is. So I'm just going to zoom in on that area. And the next thing we'll do is specify our point of interest so that we can actually start to delineate the watershed here. So this white stream network that you're seeing now show up on the flow accumulation layer is where GIS thinks the layers, the stream should be. So that might be a little bit mismatched from where the NHD flow line layers graph. So don't worry about it too much. I'm just going to turn off the flow line layer again so that we don't confuse ourselves here, because it's really important that we specify our point of interest where GIS thinks the flow should be. So I'm going to zoom in a little bit more here so that we can look at the area where we have Warriors Mark Run and the confluence with Spruce Run. So if I start to make our point of interest, to do that, we need to have ARC catalog. If you've got ARC catalog on the side of your screen here, you can go ahead and click there. But for me, I need to go here to open ARC catalog. I'm going to close the ARC toolbox for now, because that's not going to help us very much at the moment. And now all we need to do is specify where we want to create our new shapefile. So our point of interest is going to be just a single point shapefile. So I'm going to go under my practice folder that I've been using for all of the things that I've been creating so far. and right click on that folder, hit new, and then we'll click shapefile. And we can just specify Warriors Mark Run as the name. But you could call it point of interest, POI for point of interest, whatever you want to call it is fine. Then of course we want this to be a point feature type because we're just creating a single point. And then we need to specify the coordinate system. So depending on how your screen shows up and what your computer remembers you using before, you may be able to take the coordinate system that you want already from this list. But if you're not sure, we can just use the add coordinate system tool and import from another layer that's on our screen already. So that way we know it's compatible with the other files that we've used before. So I need to navigate to my practice folder and find my filled DEM layer. And I'm going to use the coordinate system from that. And so I can say, okay. And whoops, I don't think that worked. Let's try again. Import, fill DM, add. And now we can see that it's this NAD 1983 State Plane, Pennsylvania North, FIPS 3701 feet that we want to use as our coordinate system. So that was already in my favorites. So I'll hit okay. We can see that showing up here. Hit okay again. All right. And now we know that this Warriors Mark shapefile has been created, but we can't see it anywhere on our map yet. And that's because GIS has no idea where to put it. We haven't told it where yet. So we need to turn on our editor and start editing from this new Warriors Mark Run shapefile layer that we just created and hit OK. And then we can continue. Don't worry too much about the error messages. If you get anything that's giving you a warning about compatibility of the coordinate systems, you should be fine since you imported everything correctly. And now we need to have our create shapefiles thing open. So we're going to go into create features in the editing tool. And if we click on the Warriors Mark Run, I'm just a little bit nervous here. I don't feel like I'm zoomed in enough on where I need to place this point. So we're gonna zoom in a little bit more on the stream segment here. I want to be able to see where the confluence is. So somewhere in this region, we're gonna put our shapefile. So I'm gonna go back to my regular cursor and click on Warriors Mark Run, and you'll see I'll get my point for that shapefile showing up on my cursor. And I'm just gonna pick somewhere where the flow lines look straight to me a little bit. I think GIS has an easier time creating watershed boundaries if we put somewhere where there's a little bit of continuity and where GIS thinks the streamlines are. So I'll go ahead and put my shape file there. And once I'm happy with where I've put it, we can turn off our editor, stop editing, save the file. So yes. And now the next thing we need to do is add the XY coordinates for our shape file. So if we opened our attributes table, you'll see it still doesn't really know where it is. So if we assign the XY coordinates, then we'll be able to delineate our watershed properly. So I'm going to open up our ARC toolbox again, and I need to go into data management tools, features, and go to where it says add XY coordinates. So if I click on that, we can bring our input feature in, hit OK. And now if we go into the attributes table, you'll see that that worked, and we'll have our coordinates. So we're all set. Okay, so now we can go ahead and delineate our watershed. We have our filled DEM that we need. We have our flow direction that we need. We have the point of interest that we need. So we're all set. So let's go under the spatial analyst tools and find hydrology. And we get to click where it says watershed, which I always think is the most fun part. And then go to put our flow direction raster in. So we'll enter that. And then the input pour point is the Warriors Mark Run point shapefile that we created. And go ahead and call this watershed. And it's still a raster file. So we're going to leave the .tiff extension at the end there so that we're sure it works right. And go ahead and click OK, and it'll make your watershed for you. And again, it'll create basically this black looking watershed raster, as long as that's what you get. And when we play with it a little bit, it looks like the right size. Sometimes if you put this shapefile in like a not great place, you make like an itty bitty watershed and then you have to redo it. But it looks like this probably worked. Just to see what this looks like, I'll just pick another color ramp off of this so I can see it better, but that looks great. Another trick is we can click on zoom to layer and we can just go right to that layer on our watershed. And you'll see that looks good. And so I can turn off our flow accumulation layer now. We don't need that anymore. We don't need flow direction. We'll keep our DEMs because eventually we're going to clip them to that watershed boundary here. We'll bring our flow lines back in a moment too so that we can use those to look at our watershed boundary, so that we can create our map of just the Warrior's Mark run with the DMs and the stream files. So let's go ahead and zoom in on that raster so we can see where we're working. Maybe just a little bit more. All right, that looks great. So we're gonna next go back to conversion tools because we can't do anything with this raster file. We first have to get it to be a polygon. So we're gonna click raster to polygon and select our watershed raster file and call this maybe just Warriors Mark. I don't want to call this too long of a name. We can always change it a little bit here. So again, remember that GIS doesn't like anything longer than about 13 characters. So just make sure your name's less than that and you should be good. Give it a second to crank through. All right, and we'll get our watershed boundary, yay. So I'm gonna turn off the raster layer. Can remove anything you don't need right now off of your map so things are cleaned up a bit. So really you just want your DM, the polygon, the point of interest, of course, and your two flow lines. Let's go ahead and make that point of interest a little bit bigger. So maybe I'll make it a size 10, see if that looks okay. Can make it black. All right, perfect. So now we've got our point of interest and we can now go ahead and change our watershed boundary so that we've got no color, an outline maybe of black again, and maybe a width of 2. See how that looks? Okay, that looks pretty good. So now we've got to add our streamlines, and it'll take a moment to make those. If you remember, we had done the definition query on the flowline 2 layer so that we would basically not keep anything except what was just in the Warrior's Mark Run watershed. So we need to turn that definition query off now. So if we go into properties and back to definition query, we can just delete that, hit apply. We'll get all of our streams back. Okay, so you can see our 2 flow line layers help to create the total stream network here. And now all we need to do is clip the streams and the DMs to this watershed boundary, and then we'll be done with our map. So let's go ahead and do that. If you already remember how to do that, go ahead and end the video. If you need one more refresher on the clipping tools, we'll go to Analysis Tools, Extract and Clip our 2 stream flow lines. So we're going to need to clip both of them since we've got 2 lines here. We have clipped them before, but we clipped them to the Spring Creek watershed. Now we've got to clip them just to the Warrior's Mark. So I'm going to do WM stream 1 here. You can call it whatever you want. Oh, whoops, I just put that in the wrong place. So this is just going to be the Warrior's Mark watershed boundary. So I need to make sure that's what I'm setting as my cookie cutter. So the clip features is the cookie cutter and the flow line layer is the cookie dough. So don't forget that analogy here. And then we can say where we want to save the file and give it its name, hit OK, give it a second to crank through. Then we'll clip the other flow line. Then we'll merge the 2 stream files together to get our 1 continuous stream file layer. So we've got 1. That means we can remove, let's see, which one did I just make? Okay, so we've got our flow line, this one. Okay, so we need to clip this NHD flow line 1 next. So I must have used flow line 2 as the one that I used before, which is fine. As long as we've clipped both of them, then we're in good shape. So we'll use the Warrior's Mark Run again as our clip features and give this the name. So I'm going to call this WM for Warrior's Mark Stream 2 .shapefile, and it'll automatically give it that extension. So here we go. We're all set. Clip that. Wait another moment. And now we can remove our 2 original shape files. So we'll remove. Make sure we've got our 2 different lines here. So that looks perfect. So now we've just got to merge them. So if you remember, we've got to go down into Data Management Tools and General, and that'll give us our merge tool. We can merge the 2 stream files. And we'll call this Warrior Mark Stream. Then we'll have our merge stream files, and we'll be all set with our streams. And then we've just got to clip our DMs. Okay, so let's go to our raster tools. So we need to go, just if I collapse general, I think I can see a little bit better. Raster processing, clip. And remember, we need to use this tool because the DEMs are a raster file. So we'll use the fill DEM as our cookie dough, clip to the cookie cutter, check this box, and then call this Warrior Mark DEM.tiff. Don't forget that TIFF extension, and definitely don't forget this box to check. Otherwise, you'll wind up with like this awkward rectangle instead of clipped exactly to that watershed boundary. So give that a moment to clip here. All right, perfect. So we can turn off the fill DEM, change this color ramp here so that we can have our blue streams in the low points and the red as the high points. Perfect. And I'm just going to go ahead and zoom to this layer so you can bring that front and center. And let's clean this up a bit so our legend looks good when we get to making our map. So we'll call this elevation in feet. And let's call this our watershed boundary. Depending on how it clicks for you, you might wind up editing it in the properties, or you might just end up editing it there. We don't need those anymore because we mosaicked our stream layer, or merged our stream layer rather. Let's get color a dark navy for our streams. Let's do a width of 2. Okay, looks good. And let's see, what else do we need to do? Rename that as streams. And I think that looks perfect. You can change colors if you don't like how something looks. You can feel free to change the symbology a bit. So maybe you'd prefer to have maybe a red color for the watershed outlet. So let's see if that looks any better. So I might like that. You might want a wider watershed boundary so that that's thicker than the stream network. So we can make that 4. Maybe that looks good to you. All right, so if we flip over to our layout view, you can see where we left off with the last layout view we made. So it looks pretty good, except maybe we need to zoom out a little bit here. So you can change that up here if you want, and try, if you put a bigger number, then you'll zoom out a bit. So we are around 78,000. So let's try 100,000 and see how that looks. So that looks pretty good. This is no longer the Spring Creek elevation map. It is Warrior's Mark Run elevation map. And add that title and make sure everything looks good for the legend. You can make it a little bit bigger if you want. And everything else looks all right. So we're all set with how that looked the last time we made our map. So all you would need to do is export it as an image file or a PDF, however you want to save it. So I'm just going to call that Warrior Mark map, and then we'll have that saved. All right, nice job. Let's do the next video to add the land cover, and I think we'll be in pretty good shape. All right, see you in a minute.